Today I'm continuing this series that I started last week. I'm calling In Search Of. Last week I started it off with a message that I called In Search of Justice, because I'm looking at those things that we had most searched online in regards to Jesus and the Bible over the course of this last year. And so it would become no surprise to us today that the title that I'm going to speak about is absolutely connected to our experiences over the course of this last year. I want to call this message today In Search of Making Sense of Suffering. Making sense of suffering. Because suffering is something that we have inevitably experienced, but some of us at times want to make sense out of it. We do not merely want to live a life that experiences the suffering, but at times we ask God, we look to the scriptures, we look to our friends around us, we look to someone to try to help us to make sense out of the suffering. But today I want to go to one of the oldest stories in the history of the world. I don't know if you knew this or not, but I'm going to go back to the Old Testament story of a guy by the name of Job. I remember the first time I showed up in a church environment and someone pulled out the book of Job, and I thought, I don't know anything about Job. Right? And so I don't know why there's an entire book about a job. I don't really want a job. I'm a teenager at the time. I have no idea why this is here. We're going to go to this. I'm going to go through a lot of his story today, but I don't have time to go through all of it. That's always my dilemma on Sunday. I have so much I want to share in such a limited amount of time. Lest people don't return. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing. We could have a 2-day conference every week. I would be okay with that. But so I want to go to this, Job chapter 1. Here's the story. Job chapter 1, I'm going to start in verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Satan, the enemy, the devil, powers and principalities of darkness, all of this. Verse 7, the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." If you're curious about what Satan does, what our adversary does, he's going to and fro on the earth looking for someone that he could devour, looking for someone's life that he could ruin, looking for someone's life that he could inflict pain, sorrow, and suffering on. And so the Lord said to Satan something really, really peculiar, really interesting. Have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Notice the way that God refers to Job. That's a beautiful thing. I would love for God to actually look upon the life of a Mark Estep and be able to say something like that. It's an incredible description here of a blameless and upright man who fears God, turns away from evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, this is a really good question. Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. He's blessed. He's got everything seemingly going well for him. And Satan is in this conversation with God like, the only reason why Job even cares, even has any integrity whatsoever, is because everything is going well for him. But stretch out your hand and touch all he has, and he will curse you to your face. That's Satan's desire. That's what it is that he wanted to accomplish in Job's life. That's what it is that he wants to accomplish in your life. That's what the enemy wants to accomplish and have said of you, is that you would end at this particular moment of defeat. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. I know there's so much here. This is so strange to us. Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Which in this world, the pattern The powers, the principalities of darkness is the governing forces of this world. It's not the kingdom of God, but we chose through our distrust and disobedience to elevate our own self, to elevate our own agenda, pride. We give the enemy a chance and a foothold to be able to have all of these things. And so, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And look at this. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Notice this. The first attack, the first act of suffering, the first act of evil that comes against Job and Job's family, Job's life, Job's possessions was an attack of people. Right? Pay attention to that. The attack of people, that those who were already looking to be used by the powers of darkness were the ones that were employed and used in that moment to attack Job. This is still true in the current moment that we exist in, that the enemy desires to work in and through people. People whose hearts have already been hardened toward God, people whose hearts are already hardened toward the rest of humanity, that the enemy wants to work in them and through them. So the people attack. Then look at the next thing, verse 16. While he was yet speaking, this is the worst conversation in the history of the world. While he was still talking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell. Look at his description. The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. This is the second thing that happened. There's natural disaster, right? The way that he tries to describe it is that the fire of God fell, right? Have you ever noticed we still use language like that? An act of God is what we describe when something happens and it wasn't people. We can't draw a direct line to saying a person did this terrible thing. It must have been an act of God that this natural disaster happened and it's taken life and it's inflicted pain. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans, more people. Now we're back to people. The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, this is exhausting, right? Just reading through this, you're already tired. It's like, how much worse could it get in this moment? You ever have those days where it's like, it's one thing, and it's another thing, and it's another thing? Or you ever have those years where it's one thing, and it's another thing, and it's another thing? This is Job's life and experience here, all in one conversation. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. We go from people to natural disaster, to people to natural disaster. All of those things in this moment, and Job experiencing all of this suffering, he still would not curse God. Satan goes back to God to now take a shot at Job personally, at Job's health. That's the next part of this in Job chapter 2. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. So Job goes from experiencing the attack of people whose hearts were hardened to God and humanity who inflicted violence, to natural disaster, to another attack from people, to another natural disaster. And then fifth and finally, him personally becoming sick and ill, weakened now from the inside. This is suffering in such a way that honestly only sparks questions for us, doesn't it? When one thing happens and you can draw a straight line to people, that's one thing. When a natural disaster happens, we oftentimes lack words to be able to explain that action and act. When stuff happens to us closely and not just in the distance and not just to someone else in the world, it affects us in a completely and entirely different way. Job experiences suffering in every way and in every angle. That's why God gives us this story. That's why God gives us this narrative. That's why God gives us an entire book that is about suffering and wisdom. Because this describes in totality all of the types of things that could possibly go wrong. If you in your life are thinking, well, I've had this thing go wrong or that thing go wrong, and I don't know where to look, all of it is right here. Now, there's far more questions that this leaves us with than answers. But here's what I want to try to do now. Here's what I want to try to do. In the course of our rest of our time together, I want to explore some philosophies on suffering. Because all of us have the tendency to think about suffering in one of these three ways, I believe. All of us have the tendency of trying to make sense out of the suffering that we have experienced. And we usually use one of these three ways. Here's the first way. This is the way of Job's wife, okay? 3 philosophies on suffering. This will be easier than last week's philosophy lesson that happened in the middle of my message. Last week, there were some people who were like, for about 10 minutes, I'm not really sure what you said. That was not my goal, okay? When we read through some things that were a little deep. This is far easier and far more accessible for us to grab a hold of, because this is the way that we feel and how we respond. Job chapter 2, verse 9. Then his wife said to him, she's the first one to respond to this suffering, do you still hold fast your integrity? Like, really, are you still trying? Job, are you still trying to make sense out of this suffering right now? Are you still trying to do this? Are you still trying to pretend that you've got everything together? Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. All right, here's what I want to do. Here's the first philosophy on suffering, the one that Job's wife utilized us to try to make sense out of what was happening to Job and in Job's life. It's number one, it's cynicism. Cynicism. Cynicism is the philosophy that said all of this suffering that we're experiencing and that you've endured, it's pointless. It's pointless. It has no meaning to it, and it could never have any meaning to it. So if that is our conclusion, then, Job, you should just curse God and die. You should turn your back on God. You should turn your back on your integrity. You should turn your back on yourself. You should quit trying to live your life like you have. And it is so easy, friends, in the midst of suffering for us to become cynical, isn't it? For us to become so burnt and so broken by the events that we see and the things that we've experienced, for us to just think to ourselves, it is pointless. My life is pointless because of the things that I have endured, because they are all pointless. And I start to believe the worst. Right? I start to believe the worst about the world. I start to believe the worst about myself. I start to believe the worst about others. And I start to believe the worst about God. I do. It is a natural inclination for us to arrive here. Right? I am not trying to inflict guilt on us or condemnation on us. As Job's wife says, this just makes sense to us at times. That for me to cope with what has happened, it must be pointless. It must be. Because to try to try to connect meaning to it is exhausting. Is it? It's exhausting. When suffering happens in our lives and in our head, when we're constantly trying to think, okay, like, what's the purpose of this? Why is this happening? What has possibly happened in the world that would have caused this to happen to me? Why would this happen to someone like Job? Why would this happen to someone whose life is going well and seemingly put together, is full of faith? It's just pointless. This is pointless. But the rest of this book of Job is really, really interesting because Job now has friends who are going to show up, and most of the rest of the book is a dialogue between Job and not his wife, but three friends in Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. It's wonderful names. And I think that these next couple of verses that I'm going to look at sums up a lot of what they are going to say and argue about back and forth. So instead of reading all of those chapters, I just brought it down to these couple of verses for us to expedite this process. Right? Job chapter 4, verse 7. This is Eliphaz. He says, remember, this is like, hey, you remember the old saying? Don't you love old sayings? When people show up in moments of tragedy with an old saying. I love that. It's so helpful, right? I don't know the number of occasions that I've been in moments with Christians who feel the need to say something and something spiritual to explain the meaning of all of this. This is why this has happened. It happened because of this. It's like, I want to go ahead and relieve the pressure from you if you feel like you're in a situation where you need to show up and say something. You don't. You don't. You don't have to. I remember one of the struggles as a 21-year-old interim pastor at a church primarily of an older congregation, showing up at funerals feeling like I'm supposed to say something because I'm spiritual. I'm also 21, or I was, I'm not now. I turned 34 this week. It's a different thing. I got a long way to go, long way to go. But I remember showing up thinking, I have to say something. It's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. Show up. Don't say something. Show up, pray, comfort, console. You don't have to say anything. You especially don't have to deliver a one-liner that is going to explain all of the trouble in the universe. You're not that good, right? You're not. I'm not that good. We're not that full of wisdom. That's in fact what we're going to see. Here's what Eliphaz says. Remember, who that was innocent ever perished. In other words, who that didn't do something wrong ever experienced anything hard, anything bad? Or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen, his experience, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. In other words, those who do wrong experience wrong. It's that simple. He explains everything in the universe with that one thing. It is because you have done something wrong that you have experienced this. Here's what this philosophy is. This is the philosophy of moralism. Moralism. That's number 2, moralism. Moralism explains everything through the lens of punishment. It's all about punishment. And this is not a uniquely Christian struggle. This happens in a variety of faith constructs, right? This happens in pagan cultures where it's like, oh, the rain god is mad at us. That's why there's a drought. We explain these things through systems like karma. Oh, you did that, now something bad is going to happen back to you. As though that you can always draw a straight line to something bad happen in your life because you are a sinner. Now, here's what I love, is that it is easy to be Eliphaz, to show up to Job and be like, I bet you did something wrong. That's why you're experiencing suffering. Have you ever noticed how at times, like maybe throughout the last year, please don't throw rocks at me. Have you ever notice how like in our area in particular, like in the beginning, pandemic, I bet this is punishment on places like China. I bet this is punishment for places like New York. I bet this is punishment for people like the West Coast. This is punishment for La La Land, Hollywood, celebrities, their evil, sinfulness, wickedness. Have you ever noticed how when something happens to some people in a place far away, how easy it is to ascribe a direct line that it is punishment for what they did that was wrong? And then when I experience it, no, it must not be that. It couldn't be that now because I'm good. I'm nice. I'm kind. I've never done anything evil. It's very interesting to me how moralism is applied in that way. It's easy to show up and be Eliphaz and be like, this is happening to you because you did something wrong. This is punishment. I've never seen anybody in my life who's done something wrong not go punished in some kind of way with evil and suffering happening to them in the world. But also, there are many of us who are so hard on ourselves that this is the way that we think as well. This is the way we think about ourselves. I bet this is happening to me because of punishment. You know how many people grow up in church and this is their thought? How many people grow up in church with the understanding and the impression that bad things are going to happen to you, suffering is happening to you because you did something wrong? You know how many people have been told that about miscarriages? Do you know how many people have been told that about things that happen to their kids? Oh, this is happening with your kids because you didn't raise them right, because you didn't do a good job. Even though you have two kids and one of them turned out in a way that was exceptionally different than the other one. And they love Jesus and the other one does not. Those kind of things happen along the way, and it is confusing to us. But moralism always draws the straight line to be able to say, this happened to you because God is punishing you. You cannot, friends, draw a straight line. As cynicism does to suffering, to say it is all pointless and will always be pointless. And we cannot draw a straight line as moralism does to say all of this suffering is punishment. Punishment from God, punishment from the universe, punishment from somebody somewhere. That's why it is all happening. We cannot do that. And the point of Job's story is to let us know that you and I cannot just draw a straight line only and always to one thing as the answer to why. As the cause, clearly the cause in every set of circumstances to the reason why we are experiencing the suffering. Instead, here's what Job teaches us. And I think the way that Job describes this, and again, he says a lot of things throughout the entire book, but I love this one line. I think it describes it all very, very well. Job 23:10. Job says, but he knows, talking about God, God knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. It's like he knows. God knows the way that I take. He knows what I've been surrounded by. He knows my heart. He knows my integrity. He knows my flaws. He knows my doubt. He knows my struggle. He knows my pain. He knows the way that I take when he has tried me, though. I shall come out as gold. Here's the third philosophy. It's Job's philosophy. It's a biblical philosophy on suffering, is that it is hidden. It's hidden. The meaning, when I'm trying to make sense of suffering, it's hidden. It's hidden. If you have thought to yourself with expectation, you are going to figure it out clearly, directly, draw a straight line to it. You have anchored yourself to it. Doesn't happen like that. And God doesn't require that of us, require that of you. This third philosophy of hidden is a purifying one, that it opens us up to the possibility that although I do not have to figure out the point of this, it can ultimately be redeemed and have a point to it. That it can ultimately be brought to a place where God does show me in tiny pieces. The point in the midst of suffering is at times I can do a purifying work in your life through the midst of this suffering. And at times, friends, that is all that we have. But in this life, sometimes it's more than enough. Like to know that in the process of this, in the midst of my questions, in the midst of this being hidden, the reason being hidden. See, the beauty when something is hidden is that I get to look for it. But I do not journey alone. I journey with God. That God actually invites us. That's what this third thing of hidden and purifying work, it's an invitation. It's an invitation to. It's an invitation to. It's an invitation to. I start to shift my perspective in the midst of suffering, in the midst of loss, in the midst of those difficult circumstances. I start to shift my perspective as Job does, and he starts to see this is actually, it's an invitation. In the midst of this suffering, I'm going to lean into some things. It's an invitation to, first, it's an invitation to trust. It's an invitation to trust. Job says in Job 14:14, he's like, if a man dies, shall he live again? It's amazing how he's already looking toward resurrection when he doesn't know of that Jesus is going to come, that the Son of God is going to come, promising not just to die on a cross for the sins of the world, but that he is going to rise from the dead on the third day. It's an invitation to trust. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come. Right? Like Job starts to look at the suffering in his life and he was like, whether I die and experience resurrection, or if you shall renew me while I'm still living and breathing, I still trust you, God. I still would rather walk with you through this than me try to journey through this alone. I would still rather lean in when others are trying to pull me away. I would still rather seek you when others are trying to distract me. I would still rather cling to you in the midst of my devastation than to allow others to pull me away from you and drag me into defeat. I'd rather do that. I would rather not lean on my own understanding, but trust you, God. I feel like that's where my wisdom and strength come from. So whether I live or whether I die. See, all throughout the scriptures, that's echoed, right? Even Paul says that looking back on the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? If I live, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain, because I know that ultimately me living is living through suffering and me dying is me experiencing eternal life. That one way or the other, we serve a God who is alive, right? And I'd rather trust life than be dominated by death. It's an invitation to trust, but it's also an invitation to develop integrity. To develop integrity. Job thought he had integrity before this. But look at this, Job 27. He says, far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. Him telling his friends, I will not put away my integrity. I will not. I hold fast my righteousness and I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. He was like, I know that there's people around me who are trying to cause me to not be who I am. There will always be people in your life when things go wrong, when things are not working out, who show up primarily to complain, primarily to distract, primarily to add to your devastation, primarily to show up with one-liners that sound nice to explain away everything that's happened, or to just say, hey, you should throw in the towel, you should give up, you should go away, you should go home, you should stop trying to be who you are, Job. But Job is like, no. I will not put away my integrity. I will not. Not just because one thing went wrong. Not just because two things went wrong. Not just because, even though I've experienced the greatest loss and greatest pain in my life, the greatest pain imaginable, I will not give you the satisfaction of winning by me lowering my standards to yours. We need this, church. Like we need this in the world, dominated by a message of fear, dominated with a message of there's no point to anything that's happening in the universe. Well, here's the thing. I will not stop being who I am because of your fear. I will not stop being who I am because of your worry, anxiety, false teaching, lies. I will not stop being who I am because you think that things that have happened in my life disqualify me from moving forward. I won't stop. I won't stop just because there's been a season that has been devastating. I will not stop being developed in terms of my integrity. So one of the things the enemy wants for you to do is to lose sight of who you are. To lose sight of your identity as a son of God, a daughter of God. The enemy wants for you to lose your sense of connectedness and rootedness as to who it is that has given you life, where it is that your meaning and your purpose comes from. And we say to the enemy, you're nothing more than a liar, the father of all lies. I will not put away my integrity, not for you, not for you. Also, it's an invitation to gain wisdom. To gain wisdom. Job says this in Job 28. From where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. It is hidden. It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Again, it's like it's hidden. It's hidden. It's hidden. But wisdom can be found in the hidden places. Wisdom is found in the hidden moments. That's the thing about developing wisdom. Developing wisdom takes experience, but it takes evaluated experience. See, you are not wise just because you have aged. You're wise because you've had experience that you have brought into the presence of God and have submitted it to a process of understanding. Of, Lord, I do not know more now than what I did before, but I do know more now about where my wisdom comes from. My wisdom comes from you. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. But then I love this one. Lastly, it's an invitation to experience victory. Experience victory. I love when we get to the culmination of Job 42, in Job 42. When we get to this culminating moment, not where we have it described about Job getting back double of the things that he had lost, not all of that. We can get so lost and see it all works out and you get twice as much when it's all said and done on the other side of suffering. That's not the primary point and message of the story of Job. Instead, the primary point and the primary message is right here in this, in Job 42:5. Job says, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear. Like I had heard about you, God, and I was following you, and I had faith in you, and I was holding on to integrity. I was doing the best that I could and all of that. But now my eye sees you. Now I haven't just heard about you in the distance. I've seen you up close. Because as strange and weird and peculiar and unique as it is, sometimes suffering allows me to see. Not initially, but eventually. To see. It should not surprise us that Jesus suffered to the greatest degree when dying on the cross. should not surprise us that our God is a God who would be willing to experience suffering and that then meets us in suffering. That even though sometimes it doesn't make sense, in the midst of suffering, God makes sight to see just a little bit more of the wisdom of God, a little bit more of the character and the nature of God, a little bit more of what was in my heart all along, a little bit more about the world. I can see a little bit more. But here's the tension in this. Is that when we looked at this at the beginning of Job, the great tension is, God, what in the world are you doing allowing Satan to take shots at us like this? Right? That's a normal, natural thing, right? Is it, God, why would you even talk to the enemy like this? Why would you even allow this to occur in any kind of way? Did you notice in those conversations of what Satan talked about with Job, talked about with God, is that ultimately I will win. Ultimately I will defeat him. Ultimately he will curse you and he will die. Ultimately this story will end in defeat. This story will end in bitterness. This story will end in devastation and distraction. This story will end with darkness prevailing and overcoming the light. This story will end with all of that. God allowed the suffering, but the enemy did not accomplish his goal. God allowed the test, but he did not allow the enemy to accomplish his victory over Job. God did not create and God did not cause the evil and the suffering. He allowed it. He allows those things, and I can't even begin to understand why always in my life. But here's what I know in my life, and here's what I know in Job's life and all throughout the scriptures, is that the enemy can never accomplish what he wants to. Not if we don't let him. That he never accomplishes overcoming you. He never accomplishes taking you out from the purpose God has for you. He never accomplishes derailing the promises of God. He never takes that out. Never takes that out. It's an invitation to experience victory. Invitation to experience victory. So here's the question. Will I lean into what's hidden or leave bitter over what's happened? Will I lean into what's hidden? Pursuing trust, wisdom, integrity, victory. Will I lean into that which I can't fully see right now? Will I lean into what's hidden or leave bitter over what's happened? Will I leave promises of God? Will I leave who I am? Will I leave my real identity? Will I leave the call of God on my life? Will I leave relationships? Will I leave people? Will I leave my gifts? Will I leave my future? Will I leave and I walk away from all of that? Will I leave my family because I just can't stay there and deal with the suffering? Will I leave over what's happened, or will I lean into what's hidden? Because it hurts and it's painful and it is sorrowful and it is perplexing, but we're not crushed. We're not crushed in the middle of the search or the pursuit. Will I lean into what's hidden or leave over what's happened? Job says in Job 35, because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out, We do with oppressions in this world, for people, from darkness, from disaster. There's so much, so many people, so many of us crying out over so many things, and they call for help because of the arm of the Almighty, the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is God, my maker? Look at this line, who gives songs in the night. He gives songs in the night. Isn't that beautiful? And in the midst of my darkest night, He gives me a song. That in the midst of my greatest questions, He gives me comfort. That in the midst of when it seems like God is the furthest away, I experience His presence the most. How does that happen like that? And how does it make sense? Because God, who is my maker, gives me a new song in the night. Gives me a brighter light in the darkness. Gives me a new perspective when I feel dominated by pain. Our God is a maker of new songs in the midnight hour, so we can sing praise and lift prayers up to God in the midst of the midnight. Even as Paul and Silas did in prison cells, we can cry out, God, I don't know why I'm here, but You're worthy. You're worthy. You're worthy of praise. Right here, right now, You're worthy of praise. Where is God, my maker? No one says, oh, who gives us songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens. We lean in. We lean into what's hidden. We lean into what's hidden. We lean into what's hidden. We don't just leave bitter over what's happened. We lean in to what's hidden. Because my soul's greatest need, songs in the night. My soul, my soul. My soul sings. My soul's need, my greatest needs, songs in the night. Song in the night. And you may think to yourself, I'm not a songwriter. Not a songwriter. You could be a prayer though. Your soul needs for you to lean into what's hidden. Sing a new song in the night. For the Lord to give you a new, renewed trust, a new, renewed wisdom, a new, renewed vision for your life, a renewed dream for your life, a renewed sense of, my God has done it before, and He can do it again. All that I have, every good and perfect gift that came from above, it's all from Him and it's all for Him, and He holds it all together. Oh, my soul needs a song in the night. Let Him make a new song in you. Make a new song in you. Let me pray for us. Oh, Lord, I thank You. God, I thank You. I thank You for Your presence in this place. Oh, God, we thank You in our turmoil and testing and trial. God, oh, we thank You for Your nearness. We thank You for the possibility of redemption and renewal in us. Oh, and is there anybody today who's been dealing with some suffering you've been trying to make sense out of, and in the midst of this time today, God has spoken something over your life. You're like, I want to lean into what's hidden and see what it is that God wants to do new in me. If that's you, would you just lift your hand right now? I want to pray for you. I want to pray over you in the midst of this, in the midst of this suffering, in the midst of this, oh, that God could bring renewal. Oh, God, would You bring healing to these hearts? Lord, we lean into every hidden place, every place that, oh, God, that seems like it's far away and making sense out of, but, oh, we lean into You. We lean into You. We lean into You. Do something new in me today. Something new. anticipation, expectation, hopefulness. Restore it to our soul. You restore our souls. You restore the joy of our salvation. You restore. Right now in this moment, you're here in this room. You know, today I need to trust Jesus with my life. I need to give my life to Jesus today and begin a relationship with him. It's time. It's time. And if you know right now that's you in this moment, I just want to lead you in a moment with Jesus right now. Right now we call out to Jesus. Jesus, I know I need you. Jesus, I bring my brokenness to you. Jesus, I thank you for who you are. I thank you that you died for me on the cross. And I believe that you're alive. Right now in this moment, Jesus, I ask you, would you save me, forgive me, make me new, make me new. Right now, Jesus, I receive you. I receive new life and the gift of eternal life with you, Jesus. Right now in this moment, I give you my life. I give you my life. Right now, if that's you, when I count to 3, you just lift your hand to Jesus and say, yes, Jesus, that's me. I need you. Right now, I give you my life. Right now, right now. 1, 2, 3, it's me. I give you my life, Jesus. Give you my life. Oh, God, we thank you. We thank you that you make all things new. You restore back to us all that the enemy stole. We can see you moving, slowly, swelling,